It is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Yuliya Snihur, a wonderful scholar and someone who's become a dear friend over the past few months. Dr. Snihur is Associate Professor at Toulouse Business School in France. She has a PhD from Spain, IESE Business School, Barcelona, which also sets her apart from the other scholars you have been meeting in VSSCR, most of who end up getting their PhD in the US, even if they are now working overseas. Dr. Snihur got her PhD in Spain and now works in France. Her research interests are in the area of strategy, entrepreneurship, innovation. Of course, you read her paper on business models. Business models is her topic of research, organizational identity and disruptive innovation as well. She was associate editor at Long Range Planning and is now associate editor at Journal of Management Studies. With that, let me welcome Yuliya to this session of VSSCR 23. Thank you, Yuliya. So let me start with a simple question that we ask every one of our guests. How did you get interested in the idea of becoming a business professor and doing entrepreneurship research?
Thanks, Vishal, and thanks again for the invitation to this inspiring summer school, although it's not summer yet, but great to see some unfamiliar but also familiar faces. I see Marieshka is here. Hi, Marieshka. Yeah, so to get us started, as Vishal mentioned, I did my PhD in Spain in IESE, and before that I worked in the corporate world. I worked for a small industrial manufacturing company that went bankrupt during my experience there, and that was just before the financial crisis in 2008. And that experience got me thinking that I wanted to understand better what's going on, and I was originally interested in strategy. And so I decided to have a break in my business career and thought about doing a PhD to better understand what's going on, and originally interested in strategy, but also in the evolution of firms, of how firms grow but might also fail. And with my PhD in Barcelona, I moved from this focus on strategy towards also interest in innovation and entrepreneurship. And I think my biggest influence was Chris Zott, who became my advisor there, who had this really cool course on entrepreneurship in my second PhD year, I think. So I did not start as, wow, I want to study entrepreneurship, but I really was inspired by his course and by discussions about creative destruction and reading Schumpeter. And I don't know, maybe this sounds naive at this stage, but yeah, so it resonated with what I saw in business, and I was really interested about this dynamics, let's say, of change and innovation and how new firms might break through or not. And then I started researching more around business models, which was Chris's topic, it still is. And since then, I have been working on business models. And I think you read my paper with Chris, so the 2020 AMJ, which is the result of my dissertation, actually, at the IESE. It took me some time to publish, so I'm a late bloomer. But it got published eventually. So it's the research that I started in 2009, 2010 in Barcelona, that we started collecting data on these companies that develop new business models. So again, related to innovation and entrepreneurship, and continued collecting this data until around 2017, resulting in this paper that got published. So yeah, this is a long story, short story of me getting into entrepreneurship.
And Yuliya, your dissertation also won the Best Dissertation Award from the Entrepreneurship Division. Is that correct? And if yes, can you tell the participants a little bit about it?
Yeah, that's correct. So I won the Heiser Dissertation Award. So it's a dissertation award that is one of the oldest awards at IUM, offered by the Heiser family, who is a family of venture capitalists. that has had the connection with the division for many years and that gives out awards every year. And this research on new business models on innovation resonated with them and with the objective of the award. And I was very happy to win the award. So I won the award in 2014 for this research that was published in 2020. Again, I don't know if this is good or bad learning from it. So winning the award was I was very happy, and but it maybe set the bar very high for where this research should be published. And it took many years afterwards to get it published.
That's good, right? I mean, it eventually got published in Academy of Management Journal, which of course many people consider as the top publication in our field. So let me ask you the next question. You've been doing business model research for about a decade now, more than a decade. What do you see as some of the problems and opportunities in this field of work?
Yeah, I mean, the business model work started really with, historically, with the internet boom in the 1990s, when people started to discuss business models as something important for entrepreneurs that came into academia from practice. And since, I think it has been a relatively good run for the business model literature, at least from my perspective. I'm obviously biased. There have been challenges publishing business model work, particularly in the top journals. And similarly to entrepreneurship field, there has been a legitimacy issue with, is business model something we should be talking about? Is this academically relevant versus something that entrepreneurs, practitioners use in everyday speech? Should we as academics even care about that? And that has been the challenge for the last 20 years in this literature. I think that challenge is probably smaller now. But when I was starting my PhD in 2008, I mean, I was worried. I wondered, like, I asked my advisor, Chris, do you think I can publish here? Can I make a career out of this business model work? And I still remember he told me, don't worry, you will be able to have a career. And I believed him, I trusted him, and it seems to be working. But it is true that some people, particularly in strategy, it has been a place where it's been difficult to publish business model work. So there are few papers out there, but much fewer than I would expect, I would say. So yeah, our paper in AMJ was the first one in the Academy of Management in AMJ journal. Now there are a couple more. Also in AMR, but it's a long process to get these new concepts into mainstream academic journals. So that's both opportunity and a challenge. So there is reviewer resistance. Let's say you have to be very clear what business model is, how do you think about it, how do you operationalize it, etc. But now, 20 years later, let's say, I mean, there has been progress as well. So it's much better than it was even 10 years ago, I think, in this field. And we're starting to accumulate knowledge, which is great. And I think Vishal also has published with his students meta-analysis, for example, showing that novel business models matter for performance, which is something strategy scholars should care about. I think there is a lot of evidence out there that there is a strong effect, particularly for new entrepreneurial firms. The design of the business model matters. And I think now we can definitely put the hands on the table and say, yeah, they matter. And so I think the future for me, I think, is there for business model work. And I'm very excited looking forward as well. And as I mentioned, the research started with this big change with the internet. Disruption of businesses, creative destruction with new online businesses. And since then, we have seen a lot of new technologies. So now it's not only internet, it's mobile, it's AI, it's Internet of Things, blockchain, etc. Many other technologies that lead to creation of new companies with new business models. So we have seen Amazon, Netflix, eBay from the dot-com boom come up with these new business models and become very successful. And we're seeing new generations. We're seeing Uber, we're seeing Airbnb, we're seeing OpenAI, we see new companies coming in, disrupting and generating traction, particularly in this much more digital world we're living in. And again, I think business model is something that help us navigate or understand this change. but again, I'm biased, so I like business model work. And
So what do you see as the future of research in this area? Let's say young scholars want to pursue research in this area. What sort of mistakes did the young Yuliya make that they can avoid, or what are some new mistakes that they might end up making?
I mean, publishing in top journals is always hard, so I don't know if it's a mistake or not, but it requires a lot of persistence and motivation. Sometimes you just give up and say, well, I mean, if I would have published this paper that I published in 2020, in like 2010, I probably would have had many more citations than I do now. So that's some of the takeaways. Well, research takes a long time to publish, and there is a timing effect as well. So if you publish later rather than earlier, you might get less citations, despite having worked on this for 10 years, etc. So advice to Yuliya, well, publish quicker and focus on publishing first rather than later. So it's not obvious how to time it well. So there is this effect in academia of hype or of being first, and those ones get citations. And I haven't really cracked this yet, so this is my post hoc rationalization of things. But yeah.
Well, we are all learning, right? So you also serve as editor, as we discussed, and you also review papers. What do you look for in a paper? How do you decide if a paper has potential or not?
Yeah. So I have been an editor in Long Range Planning, which is a old British journal. That strategy used to be called Long Range Planning. You might wonder, why is it Long Range Planning? Strange name. And they kept this name for many years. And this journal was published in 2010, special issue on business models. And this issue was so successful that it drove the impact factor of the journal from like 1 or 2 to 6, 7, 8 since for many years, and still impacting the journal. So the journal became a home for business model work in some way. So a lot of papers on business models have been are still published in Long Range Planning, which became a little bit of an alternative to SMJ. So when you got rejected from SMJ, you would go to LRP. You would be like, okay, I don't have to have this conversation about why business models can matter for strategy. I'll just pass to the next stage. Is this a good quality research or not? So yeah, being editor at Long Range Planning has been great for looking at business model work, reading it, and trying to influence a bit where the field is going. And since then, I'm now an editor at JMS, Journal of Management Studies, another British journal. I have this British connection for some reason, despite living in France. They seem to appreciate me. Yeah, so what do I look for in a paper? Well, novelty, originality. I think that's always we want to see fresh ideas. We want to read a paper that really has a cool setting, has a good timing. It's one of the first, rather one of the last, that's making strides in a new, exciting literature in some way. And more, particularly at JMS these days, we have these discussions about non-Western settings, and we're actually looking for data and encouraging data from countries, places that are less usual, such as US or Europe. So that's so like if I have a paper from India or from China or from I don't know, Sri Lanka, I will look at it very carefully to try to push it through. At least that's our little bit perspective of editors at JMS these days. But yeah, novelty, good timing, cool setting. Those are some of the big things that can compensate, let's say, for maybe a little bit less rigor or not perfect design. But those are the thresholds matter as well. So it needs to be rigorous and high quality, plus novel to get to R&R. So if I talk about business model work, I mean, I haven't really answered about future, what I'm excited about for business model papers. Right now, I think a lot of things around business model connections to ecosystems. This is this intersection that is really interesting to me, and also around business models and platforms and how companies manage platform business models and portfolios of business models in general. So those are some of the intersections, let's say, where business model conversations are happening. And finally, questions about societal impact of business models, and that's a little bit where my research has been going these days, looking also at negative consequences of new business models. So studying, well, we have been looking at Airbnb and its negative consequences in Barcelona, for example. So how these new exciting business models, these digital platforms in particular, can have also unintended problematic consequences for stakeholders, how particularly platforms that scale very fast can burn some bridges. So this a little bit, I mean, I've been doing research on positive consequences of business model innovation. Now I'm a little bit turning to the dark side. Maybe it's becoming older, less naive.
We'll talk about the dark side in just a minute. I wanted to follow up on something you said earlier, which is that JMS is particularly interested in welcoming research from non-North American or non-Western European contexts. But do you also see some challenges with the studies that come from there, or what trends are you seeing maybe that might help our audience sort of think about how to publish in a good journal like JMS?
Sure. And I mean, this is conversation not only JMS, but also AMR and other journals have been having in the recent couple of years of, on one hand side, we want more research from around the world. On the other hand, often there is lower quality in those studies, and it's difficult for the authors to break in or to understand how better to frame, or so it's always the question is how the specific setting of yours study from, I don't know, Mongolia, how does it matter for other countries, and what is the conceptual insights that we can get from that? Can you build theory from that specific setting that will be relevant to people in US, in France, in UK, who are the main audience of these journals? So I mean, most of the readers are in business schools in UK, in France, in US, so you somehow have to appeal to them. But I think we're seeing studies that both build and test theory in settings that are less usual, and but there's definitely an argument to be made why that setting is relevant. But I think it can be very, very interesting. And obviously much less explored. I mean, we always look for these diamonds in the rough that are still rough, but have some kind of a grain in them. So if you're looking at a US database where there are 50 papers published or 100 papers published out of it, well, it's very hard to make it a diamond. You know, it's maybe will be a silver or not, but so okay. These exceptional settings, well, can give exceptional insights, but it's hard work.
Okay, let me open the floor to questions from the audience. So we have a question from Mariska. Mariska, go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Yuliya. I have a question, but first I wanted to publicly share my appreciation and thank you for the year of mentorship. It was amazing. It really was so incredibly helpful in my professional development and clarity of thinking. So for our community to know too as well the service that you give to people, it's outstanding. Yuliya, I was wondering with your ANJ that began with your doctoral work, and it took a while to publish it. How did you hold on to protecting it? I'm putting myself in those shoes, and I could feel the early career researcher pressure of publishing, yet you held out for the top tier journal. How did you stay committed to that and protecting it as opposed to publishing in a lower tier journal earlier?
Yeah, thanks, Mariska. Thanks for kind words. And Yeah, so how to do it. Well, my approach has been the innovation approach, the portfolio approach. Often in innovation we say there are many ideas and you don't really know. It's hard to evaluate them early on, and it's better to have a portfolio of ideas rather than just one. And so, I mean, you try to evaluate which ones of your papers have higher potential, and like winning these awards seems to give signs that, well, there is potential there. So you should probably try to publish them in better journals. But if I only had that and I waited for 8 years after graduation to get that one publication, well, that's not a recipe for successful academic career, I have to say. So yeah, having several projects in parallel and going lower with some and higher with others has been my approach, and working on several projects at the same time, while prioritizing, but also having several things going in parallel, and having support of senior colleagues. That's always been my approach. So I'm sure I wouldn't have done it if I didn't have Chris's support and guidance in the process. So going it alone is a very, I would say, risky choice in academia, particularly because the learning curve is so steep, and yeah, it's so helpful to get advice. And still, I mean, I'm 12 years, 20 years, not 12, 15 years, almost 15 years into this career, and I still learn a lot. So if you can get support, being single author on a paper, I would advise against that, especially when you're still learning the ropes.
And Yuliya, one of the papers that students read for today is Zort, Amit, and Masa's 2011 Journal of Management paper. So your advisor was already doing business model research before you started. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, Chris was, he published in SMJ, the 2001 paper, which was one of the first business model papers in a top journal out there that tried to give legitimacy to the field. But yeah, and then the JOM review that came out in 2011, that was during my time as a PhD student. So he was doing research in that area and still is. And so I'm a little bit the next generation where, I mean, Chris was doing research on business models, and then the new literature has become this business model innovation literature, let's say. So the first couple of years, there have been more discussions about typologies of business models, and a lot of research in IT, in e-commerce about different business models. And then this idea of business model innovation picked up at around 11, 12 for the last couple of years.
Perfect. The next question, I think Shikha has a question. Shikha.
Thank you very much. So I have a similar question on the AMJ paper, and this is from your experience on a qualitative study. When you enter the qualitative study, were you aware that you would be researching this over a period of 4 years, the company, and you'd be following the company for 4 years? Or while the study was emerging and till you reach the point of saturation, you would just continue irrespective of the number of years? So how does an early stage scholar plan the period of study for a qualitative study, especially a case study like how you had attempted? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shika. So originally, I didn't plan for longitudinal design. I collected data on many cases of high business model innovation and low business model innovation. And my idea was cross-sectional. I want to finish this PhD in 2 years. Oh my God, don't ask me for more interviews kind of perspective. But then looking at my data, then I zoomed in on a couple of companies. And then we developed a report with these couple of companies, and I started to follow them, and I gathered some more interviews with them, and it grows on you. Sorry, but that's like qualitative research, that how it emerges and how it continues. And then those cases became interesting to follow, and then they started changing. So my original research question was why some founders decide to innovate business models and others don't. And then I had some of these cases that innovated, and then I followed them for 1, 2, 3 years, and then they started to change their business models. And I was so frustrated. I was like, oh my God, something is wrong is happening. I'm not, what is happening with this study? I don't understand. And then thinking about, well, we interpreted this as, well, business model innovation is dynamic and it's a process. And if they start innovating, they continue innovating. And to stay current, they have to keep changing their business model. And that was a little bit the insight of that paper that came out of this longitudinal observation over time as by itself. It was not a planned, oh, I'd love to keep following these companies for several years. I mean, I moved to Toulouse and I kept coming to Barcelona to collect this data. And then we got an R&R from AMJ in like 2016 or something. And the R&R was like, we don't believe you. What are you telling us? This is all not true. So I went again and collected another 10 or 20 interviews for that R&R. I was like, I don't want to talk to these people ever again. And then I had to talk to them again. So yeah, very much emergent, follow the data really seriously. Yeah, okay, let's do it more. I'm not sure you want to hear this, but yeah.
No, but I think that's good for participants to hear, right? Because what we see is a good-looking paper, right? But what we don't know is the backstory, the messy sort of things that happen behind the scenes. So thank you for sharing that. Mehak, do you have a question?
Thank you, Professor. I really enjoyed your talk. My question is very specific to developing countries where entrepreneurs usually tend to protect their ideas. And we see that in a growing technological fusion area, there's so many new entrants in the industry. So I would like to have your perspective on business model innovation protection and how entrepreneurs, both from academic entrepreneurship point and we could say technology entrepreneurship, will go about protecting, and how we should pursue such case study in terms of publication.
Yeah, Mahak, this is a very useful, interesting question about protecting business models. And again, you would probably argue that it depends on the different industries, where in some industries you can get a patent and you can have some legal mechanisms to ensure the protection happens. This is, I mean, TISA's framework of profiting from innovation has been saying this for some years, but with entrepreneurs, it can be very, very different depending on cases. So their personal views on this. And I mean, at least from research in my work, a lot of stuff what Cassie Eisenhardt did, the McDonald's and Eisenhardt paper from 2020. I mean, often entrepreneurs, they protect, but they also learn. So it's particularly early on in terms of business model. If it's a nascent industry, it might be very not obvious what the business model could be, and what to protect and what to not protect. Mm-hmm. So to me, that could be an interesting question to examine what different entrepreneurs do. At least from qualitative data, we know that often entrepreneurs learn from both competitors, but also substitutes. Substitutes being companies maybe not exactly in the same industry, but close by. And so how do you balance this learning versus protection is not straightforward for different companies.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure I'm answering, but I'm seeing this more as a process, if you want, and yeah, that's probably interesting to look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking for that in terms of how should be in those countries, because not every country is having protection for business method and related. So how should we go about investigating and researching in that particular topic where those protection is not available?
Well, most countries don't have business method protection.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
In US, but even in US, business method protection is very, very weak. So I would assume that that's normal case rather than a strange case. And how you go about, well, you can collect qualitative data and ask them. That's one way to go about it. If you have databases with applications for patent protection, that's what innovation scholars typically do. They get access to those databases. Mm-hmm. But that's probably not the full answer, I would argue, particularly for business model work. That's one of the challenges. I mean, Vishal asked before about challenges. There is not really a database of business models out there. And if you do work on business models, it's really, you have to roll up the sleeves and start your own data creation somehow and collect data and figure out how to collect it. And that's the fun and the complicated part.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor.
Fred, I think you are next.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Yuliya, I really inspired by your work. So the papers that we read are mostly about how BMI can add value to a form, a business, and how it would positively impact its performance. So I was wondering, maybe an outdated business model, how it would hurt the business or industry. I don't know if there's any research on this area. Is it promising to look into? And you were talking about your look at the dark stuff. That was what I was thinking. I love that kind of stuff. You talked about how the Airbnb is a disaster in Spain. And I do notice there are some new business model in China, like platform type business, that are creating bad influences in different kind of social aspects. So I wonder if those things are worth looking into if, say, I'm interested in researching business model. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Yeah, I mean, you can have this contrarian view. This is often entrepreneurship research. We say, well, or entrepreneurs, it's useful to think something that's no one else thinks. So, I mean, we have had 10 years or several years of research showing that new business models are positive for firm performance, and looking mainly at economic performance of businesses. However, there is evidence out there that these new business models that we're seeing related to technology do have also other consequences, maybe not economic consequences, not easily quantifiable consequences on the bystanders or the local populations or the cities where they are implemented. So this question about value destruction by particularly quickly scaling digital platforms, to me, is a very relevant topic. So it's a little bit contrarian in the sense that, yeah, business model innovation leads to high business performance, but it might have also problematic consequences. So I'm a big protagonist of this kind of research or examination. And I mean, I mentioned the study we did with Airbnb. I can post the link in Barcelona, and it started as a collaboration with Airbnb, where we worked with Airbnb to understand its positive influence on the city of Barcelona, which is one of the most touristic cities in Europe. And it ended up as not collaboration because the findings were not in the direction that Airbnb appreciated in terms of consequences for the city and the political consequences and big conflict that is still ongoing or is not finished, let's say. So yeah, I mean, it depends very much. Like, you can look on the dark side or you can look on the bright side. It's a personal matter. As researchers, we have this freedom. This is the greatest part of this profession. You can choose which side you want to look at. But I think as scholars, this is something that, yeah, we can shine some light on this. It's almost like we're journalists and we can uncover some facts about the business that can be pleasing, but that can also be not so pleasing. And yeah, I mean, we have a lot of issues with business. And I'm just editing the special issue on hype and entrepreneurship in JBV. And yeah, the entrepreneurship is great, but it can also create hype cycles and destroy a lot of value. So I'm the proponent, but you have to decide what you want to do the research on.
Wonderful. I think the next question is from Lucy, but let me remind our audience that Dr. Snihur has a hard stop in 10 minutes. So Lucy, you can go next.
Thank you. I want to follow up with the negative consequence of business models, especially unintended consequences at the community level. I want to ask about the negative natural consequences to natural environment. For example, some resources the use for resources in small community differently. Different business models will lead to bad environmental, like deforestation or this kind of environment problem. And also, is there any paper talking about the interactions between business models and the natural environment? Because I see some papers like business models have some consequences then period. And then is there any interaction, like when the natural environment also changes, how that reversely impacts the business model changes? So is there any research in this field? If so, would you please type the authors or some papers in the chat box for young scholars, like I study entrepreneurship at the community level, to get started. So it will be very, very beneficial if you could type some names that study the negative consequences unintended on natural environment or social impact for me to get started. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. So in the business model world, there is this strand of literature that looks at mainly positive consequences of new business models in terms of, for example, change to renewable resources or change to sharing a circular economy, let's say. However, in this space, I mean, it's, let's say, recent trend to ask also about the negative consequences. So it's like 2, 3, 4 years in the last of research. I mean, I don't want to do too much self-promotion, but yeah, I put a couple of things in the chat. So I mean, in this call with Nancy Bokken, she's another person that does research on new business models and more sustainable business models and the positive sides. But we had this call with her to look at the negative sides or the value destruction side of business model innovation impact on society and planet. So I put the sites in the box, but I'm sure you can find some base for it. So it's not going to be 100 papers, but you can probably find 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can check in the references. So the Barcelona one is more of the negative social consequences, and probably you can find some negative environmental consequences as well.
When you talk about negative consequences, are you talking about critical theories or no?
Well, it depends on the paper. In our case, we didn't use a critical theory. We tried to look at the ecosystem, or let's say the stakeholders that are not part of the value proposition served in case of Airbnb, so the neighbors. But they suffer from the consequences. And then they go vote for a mayor who says, we don't want tourism anymore. And then the mayor says, we don't build more hotels in Barcelona. And the mayor says, we will fine Airbnb 600,000 euros because they are doing all these bad things to our city.
Do you think the negative consequence on natural environment
Lucy, I'm going to interrupt. Lucy, I'm going to interrupt you. We are on a short clock here, and Dr. Snihur has a hard stop, and we have a line of people waiting to ask questions. But Yuliya, is it okay if Lucy follows up with you on an email?
Please do.
Perfect. Aris, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you. So, Professor Snihur, thank you for sharing your path and story. And since you said you're focusing on business models, I would like to ask you how a business model correlates, and if it directly correlates with the progression of a firm, of a company. You shared your example in your early stages where the company that you were working for bankrupt. So I would like to say how a business model can really that stands out, let's say, has the same progression for the company, or it can shift. So what does it mean? And yeah.
Yeah, good question, Aris. So there is this strand of research now starting to look at pivoting and changes, and particularly for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs often start with some idea about the business model, and then it can evolve and change more early on, less later on. At least that seems to be the evidence that there is a lot of changes in the business model in the first 1, 2, 3, 4 years of a company's life, and less later on. But we don't know that much about it. Okay, so that's so this business model change, transformation, process dynamics is something that is definitely interesting. So in new firms, we definitely know that there is a lot of change early on. In established firms, we know that business model transformation can be difficult. So there are a couple of studies suggesting, particularly when there is business model change, there is a problem for person environment fit, for example. So for employees working for the company, employees might be dissatisfied and leave and evaluate the company much less well. So there are studies that looked at Glassdoor, for instance, ratings of companies. After business model change, those ratings go down. So yeah, changing the business model is complicated, which confirms things we know about inertia. So changing business models, coming back to creative destruction, incumbent firms, it's difficult. Okay, but this is definitely an open area of research, both in the new firm side, how business model pivoting happens, what are the boundary conditions, who pivots more, how to pivot better. And the other side is the established firms, where we know that less business model transformation happens, and how to do it well is also not obvious.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Sunny, I think you're next.
Oh, hi. Thank you for having me have a question. I have really a quick question for you. A couple of years ago, I was interested in business model. I got discouraged by a few people. Okay, here's the reason. And like reason number one, they said business model is business process. Okay, that's number one. Business model actually is for practitioner audience, it's not for scholar audience. And number three, business model is not really a theoretical contribution to the literature. That's the three big things was on my way. Now, when I see you publish that, I was that's really good, awesome. Tell me how you overcome those barriers. I'm sure you heard that before. That's my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Sunny. So as I mentioned, it's not obvious to publish in business model world, and particularly in top journals, I'd say. So we have seen publications in mid-tier journals, and the entry into top journals has been very complicated. It's slowly changing, and I think particularly in entrepreneurship, it has been resonant. So it makes sense to people that entrepreneurs design business models and experiment and pivot with business models. And that's, you can say it's practitioner oriented, but it's a language that you can use when you talk to people. And with the lean startup methodology, with the popularity of business model canvas, I think it's a good thing. So we're not completely in the ivory tower. We can talk about something that practitioners actually care about. So my answer would be that so far business model work, particularly in entrepreneurship, seems to resonate. And there is, you can argue, there is some theoretical value you can find in thinking about business models, in thinking about change or imprinting or pivoting or experimentation related to business models. Is business models a theory? Well, obviously it's not a theory, it's a concept like many concepts out there. You can have the same complaint about, I don't know, ecosystem, you know, is it theoretical? Is it something practitioners talk about? Is it academically relevant? But yeah, there are those debates in many places. And I mean, so I have thick skin right now, so I'm not worried on my side.
Wonderful. Glory, do you want to go next?
Okay, last question, because
Yes.
I have to run afterwards.
Okay, thank you. My question is, how do you see, what are your thoughts on platform businesses as institutional entrepreneurs? So platform businesses like Uber, how do you see them as change agents, which is another word for institutional entrepreneurs? Thank you very much. Did you hear my question?
Yeah,
Okay.
I heard, Gloria. I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I see Uber as an entrepreneur. I'm less 100% clear on how they are institutional entrepreneurs, but I guess you can make the argument, sure. What I'm still trying to understand, what do you want to get at?
Okay. My thesis was on fintech, because I'm based in Africa, and fintechs have.
Gloria, I think we lost you. Yuliya, we have someone from France on the call, Oscar. Is it okay if he asks his question?
Yes, please. Last question.
Okay, Oscar.
Gloria, maybe send me an email. I'll reply to the email because we have sound issues here. Yeah, Oscar, please.
Hi, Professor. Nice to meeting you. Thank you for your very rich and interesting and stimulating presentation. My question is very short and it's related to what Sonny asked a few minutes ago in terms of the barriers. So why do you think the authors name business model innovation in other ways? Because I read many papers in different journals, and I think that some authors are talking about business model innovation, and in fact, they just refer as innovation in a basic way or innovative processes, and they don't use the term of business model innovation. Why do you think is the reason?
I think, Oscar, we live in a very pluralistic academic world. And there are many journals, there are many conversations, and there are many terms out there. And if you want to study innovation, or you want to study process, or you want to study business model innovation, well, that's fine. I don't really think all the world should look only at business model innovation. I mean, there is product innovation, there is process innovation, and there is management innovation out there. And there is leadership innovation, and there is business model innovation. I think you choose the label that suits best your context, or you focus on what you want to study. And you have to carefully choose those labels, because then you end up in that world. So, I mean, I've been living in the business model world, given my publications and my interests, and in some way predetermines which journals you publish in, or so I became editor at Long Range Planning because I worked on business models, and I continue working on business models. But that doesn't mean that that's the only part of the world out there in the academic world. So in a sense, you choose your community, and then you stick with it for some time, but you can also go away and do something else as well. So it's a little bit of a fluid, pluralistic academic world, but you have to be careful when choosing these labels, because you will end up in conversations where there are some maybe implicit ways of navigating those conversations. So in the business model world, there will be schools of business models defined as activity systems, or business models defined as cognitive schemas, or and then you'll have to use the definitions that best suit you, and those will be the reviewers reviewing your work. And so you have to be aware of what's related to the terms you use. And sometimes you might not even be aware and just use a term. You might write randomly routine in your paper. And then you realize, oh my God, there's all this big community of people who study routines, and they have all these possible definitions about what a routine is and isn't, and how it's important or not. And oh my God, but I didn't even want to talk to them. And then one of my reviewers is a routine scholar. Wow. And they want me to rewrite the paper as a routine paper. So that's an example for you of something else. But yeah, so in academia, words matter. What concept you choose matters very highly, and be very careful when you choose your words. And sometimes you might want to go with that community, or you might not want to go with that community. So if you don't want to touch business model people, well, don't mention business model in your paper, or the opposite.
So Yuliya, I know you have to go. Before we let you go, is there any one piece of advice that you would have for aspiring scholars?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long-term game. So I think one piece of advice is, like, if you want to be in academia and you're choosing your thesis topic, and you're probably going to have to work on it for many years, So choose carefully and choose the people you want to talk to, and also try to go to conferences and meet those people, because they're actually people. So when you say, well, I'm using this Amit and Zod definition of business models, well, they're actually people and they exist and they will read your work at some point. They might like how you use their definition or not. So beware of that. So it's a intellectual, but also social world, and you choose which world you want to inhabit and who your reviewers are going to be by making those citations and by using those specific words in your work. And you need to keep being inspired by that topic for a while. So a business model, it's wide enough to keep you interested for several years, at least for me. Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Vishal, for the introduction. And hopefully this was useful for some of you. Please feel free to contact me by email if you wish to continue the conversation. This was rather short, but hopefully useful and interesting. And thank you again, Vishal. You're doing a great job. I'm sure everyone appreciates as much as I do for your efforts to create and help community of PhD and new faculty.
Thank you, Yuliya, for your time. I know you have to go, but thank you very much and have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you. Good luck with the rest of the seminar. Bye.